right, everybody. Hey, thanks for those of you that kind of made it out on a very frigid day. So once again, I just want to say, hey, welcome to the Grail Meetup. Once again, I'm Bill Rowland, and I just wanted to quickly, kind of ask everybody to offer a brief introduction. Obviously, John and I are going to be talking a little bit about some of Google's SEO guidance that was provided to us recently within Search Engine Land. Hey, what's going on, man? Come on in. And so with that, John Lister, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John. I'm a strategist at Lean SEM. Our office in Philadelphia is in neighborhood. I've been in this industry since 2009. Most of my work these days is enterprise level e-commerce or for larger brand SEO. That's it.
Good times.
Hey, John.
Hi, John.
Hi, I'm Mira. I do front-end development and UX research.
Cool.
Oh, we're all good. Okay.
Wow.
My name's Carolyn, and I work here at Trinity, and I guess I specialize in SEO content writing.
Yeah. My name is Matt. I'm also an SEO associate here at Trinity, specializing in e-commerce and on-page content.
I'm Jay. I'm a senior associate here at Trinity.
Poker specialist.
Everything, because I'm awesome.
I'm Brandon. I've been at Trinity for a little over a year, and I've worked in e-commerce for 4 to 5.
Chris, I think it's your turn.
That's me, Chris, independent SEO consultant, little website anyways. This is weird.
I know like all you guys.
Hey, what can we say is like 15 degrees outside, you know? It's all of us and some close personal friends, okay? So
How much sooner do you want to be back out there? Say your name.
exactly.
Name, rank, serial number.
I'm Jerry, and I make handmade furniture and decor, and I also do my own website, e-commerce, SEO, everything. One-man shop, and starting to plan the next step, which might be taking on a partner. Hopefully it'll be a partner who is very good with SEO and everything in that department.
Cool.
And I have a lot to look forward to in that direction.
Awesome. J Bones.
I'm Jay Bones. Formerly, I've been in SEO, analytics, and shitty front-end development for about the past decade, and I also work at Trinity.
Wow. Seems to be a theme.
My name is Alex. I have 2 e-commerce B2B sites. Been up since 2010, and inspired to learn more.
All right, cool. Well, great. So John and I are going to be kind of tag teaming tonight's presentation. So real quickly, I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit about like some of the things we're going to be covering and so on. So once again, we're going to do a little quick intro. Then we're going to kind of get into some specifics with regards to a post. This is all our presentation. All is kind of focused around this post on Search Engine Land and what exactly is going on with that. Afterwards, we're going to kind of like talk about a little bit what we feel is realistic with regards to what's in the post, because once again, Google has kind of provided some guidance and talks about how they kind of approach SEO for some of their properties, and while that might be appropriate for some, certainly it's not realistic for others. We're going to talk a little bit about what's not all that realistic, and we'll get into some other things that John and I kind of like have pointed out that we think might be doable from for just about anybody, regardless of your size. So with that, I think we already went through our introduction, so we're not really going to kind of revisit that. But suffice it to say, we'll move on towards the post. So once again, this is a post that was done recently in Search Engine Land, and in that post, it kind of talked about, as I mentioned, how Google approaches a number of different ways in which it optimizes some of its own properties. So in short, what it kind of gets into is, hey, these are some of the things that we think that you ought to do. So as you can see here, some small changes make a big difference, and it talks about some specifics. Then it also talks about embrace change, which is pretty broad and amorphous. And then it goes on to some things such as consolidation. So consolidation from a site standpoint and also from a content standpoint. So I think that we each have our own kind of ideas with regards to like what's realistic and what isn't. So I'm going to cover a couple, and then John, I'll ask you to step on up here and give us your 2 cents at least on a few of these. So first of all, add canonicals, and I think that generally speaking, most of us that work here deal with this on a regular basis. and perhaps some others. So once again, the point of canonicalization is kind of remove duplication. Chris, would you care to elaborate on, from your perspective, like canonicalization and its importance? Why is it important? That type of thing.
This is audience participation.
Damn right, man. Everybody knows I like to put people on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, for scenarios where you have e-com and product filters and things like that, URL changes to accommodate like changing the color and size on things. You basically have the same page with a different URL, the same title tag, and description, all that fun stuff. So you attach a canonical to that, it points back to the original unfiltered page and say, this is the one we should rank, ignore the others. You can kind of do it for, like, if you were doing guest posts on another site, you also want to have it in your site, you can put it on that site and then canonicalize yours over to them or something like that.
And
in the past, I've used it in healthcare where they just had all these pages that got put up because they had to and
Right.
really get rid of them, so we put canonicals on there even if it was kind of questionable.
So in short, it kind of like, from a grant standpoint, John, maybe you can weigh in, like, essentially you're kind of diluting the value of that content. It might be sprinkled all over the place, and as long as everything is kind of pointed back to one particular URL, that kind of helps that one URL, in short, kind of rank better than it really would otherwise. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's fair. You can also use them cross-domain. You have two sites that are essentially like two different brands, but your developer decided, one template's just as good here as it is over there. You effectively have two sites. You can cross-domain canonical across those duplicate pages, give yourself one authoritative page, so they don't compete with one another and cannibalize the same traffic.
So would everybody here kind of like, when we're talking about canonicals, generally speaking, most people, regardless of their size or complexity of the organization, fairly realistic? Shouldn't be all that difficult to actually do, correct?
But Google doesn't really point out here that it's a suggestion.
Right.
It will obey it, but like sometimes we won't obey it, and then all overnight you could have.
Well, that's when things become a real mess. And so when you have a site that's profoundly messed up, obviously Google's confused, and as a result, it's not going to necessarily respect the canonical, which is certainly an issue. But generally speaking, I think that overall the guidance as a group would probably say, yeah, we generally agree. Yes, there are times when it depends, Jay, and I would agree. But overall, I would say it's pretty rare to find a site that's so profoundly messed up that it's unlikely that your canonicals will be respected. Would you agree with that, James?
Yeah, usually if that's the issue, it's probably because your site's jacked up in other ways, and Google's like, nah, you're wrong.
Yeah, pretty much.
Exactly what they say.
Yeah, exactly.
What tools do you guys use to get your list of URLs that you need canonical?
Streaming frog.
Yeah. Crawl with Screaming Frog, and generally speaking, it's going to be able to pull it. Yeah, so that would work really well, as long as once again the canonical tag should be placed. It's in the head. You're able to crawl it and access it. Are there any other ways the canonical will be present? I mean, for example, let's say if you're going to change it in GTM, then it may not. I mean, if you do a standard crawl using Screaming Frog, then it won't pick it up. But if you were to
switch it to JavaScript,
I was going to say,
put correct delay on it, it might.
What?
I've had mixed results with that.
Okay,
But
so
I think it's a small use case that most people probably don't.
right.
Yeah, it was like that Moz post that was about like, how to do dev with GTM. It's like, this is a real big band-aid fix, like an underlying issue.
Well, I mean, it's
Web dev doesn't work.
Right, yeah, we literally can't do any dev in sites, we'll just do it all through GTM. Like, ooh.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's to your point. I mean, that's like the very last, the backstop. That's not a first step. That's like the last possible step. So definitely.
Real quick, if you're just doing like a spot URL check, you use an info operator in search results. If you're trying to see like what canonical URL Google is serving, info : whatever URL.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Next, so href lang tags. Now, from my perspective, this is something that was mentioned specifically within the post, and I think they were talking specifically about how you can put those into your XML sitemap. Certainly useful. Certainly, that's something you could do. Once again, if you have an international site, if you don't, probably not super useful. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, if you're in 3 different countries, essentially you should have an href lang tag on referencing each one of those countries on every single page, I believe, and then those other pages need to refer back to that specific page itself. So, I mean, generally speaking, shouldn't be all that difficult. Matt, you could probably figure out how to stick hreflang tags within your XML sitemap. Is
It
that?
must be very simple then.
Oh, well, I wasn't making a comment there. I was more or less asking a question, but all right. Well, all right. He's just waiting for the abuse. But yes, Matt, you could, believe it or not. Hence the softball. Thank you very much.
Underhand toss.
So, needless to say, that is certainly something that's going to be considered realistic. Now, certainly, updated metadata, I think we all, more or less, in one way, shape, or form, can't escape that. And for anybody that's not familiar with that, that includes everything from keyword research to title tags to descriptions and so on. Certainly doable. And from that perspective, I think that overall, abundantly easy to do and all that other good stuff. Hey, man. Come on in. Yeah, come on.
I guess I can go home.
Yeah, no worries. Sit on down.
On the topic of metadata, your meta description, is your recommend, is that something you don't change once you have an established blog post? You have some more stuff you want to that.
No, I mean, the thing to probably be more concerned about is not so much the description, but also the title. But I mean, even then, you can change it. It's not the end of the world. I mean, at the end of the day, you might sit down and publish a post, and let's say a couple months in or a few months in, you're like, hey, you know what? The terms that I was hoping to really get some traction on aren't happening, and as a result, you can tweak it. I mean, what do you guys think?
It's not a ranking factor. Put whatever the hell you want to in there.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the title. So, like, let's say the description is cool. But you can pretty much change that at will. In terms of if you find that your post isn't really ranking for what you really need it to, you don't really have too much to lose by actually changing the title.
Do the descriptions, changing up descriptions just to get that whole keyword tag.
Right. Yeah. So you mean from a conversion standpoint?
Just go through it.
Yeah.
In a previous life, we used PPC ad copy to rewrite meta descriptions for SEO. The logic being that if we're A/B testing certain phrases, then the ones that won and did better, we could use for SEO.
So you
increase CTR and maybe even position.
So you'd find out, you might find that out afterwards. So you're already running your campaign, you're finding what's converting best, and as a result, you're including that terminology within the titles.
Yeah, if their PPC teams are using it in their ads, and then there's people see that same terminology again in your organic posting. There was some data that in some tests it did well. Other tests it's kind of flat. I don't think it was universally bad though.
Right, exactly. So totally. From our perspective, I think it's totally realistic. Great. So AMP, John, we talked about AMP a little bit. You want to come up and talk a little bit about your experiences with AMP, or what do you want to share from there?
I didn't look at the deck beforehand.
But, from my perspective, I don't know if implementing AMP for the vast majority of people would be super realistic, because I think that it gets technically chewy and it can be...
Yeah.
It just requires more resources, a lot more work will go into it, and while it can be useful, I just think...
What is an AMP page?
Pardon me?
What is an AMP page?
What is an AMP page? Well, I'm glad you asked. An accelerated mobile page.
An AMP page is like 6 months worth of meetings and then nothing gets done.
No, I'm being facetious. So it's just like
Yeah, so just as an explanation, so an AMP page essentially is a page that basically is developed in a very restricted, with restricted coding as required by Google. And in short, it can serve, the purpose of the page is to be really, really fast and to really provide a better user experience because of that speed. So as a result, essentially when they've assembled AMP, the AMP project says you can only use coding in a very specific way. You can only use JavaScript in a very distinct way, and as a result, these pages load very, very quickly. Typically, they're a little bit more useful for sites that have use content, or the content tends to be a little bit more static, as opposed to something that's much more dynamic. Does that make sense?
Mostly, yeah. When eBay got involved with the AMP project, it sort of changed everything for e-commerce because they went all in with like 8 billion of their URLs. So then Google and the AMP project were like, well, shit, I guess we need a shopping cart. And all those other sort of e-commerce features kind of got integrated. That said, it's obviously far from robust. Like, you can't do you wouldn't be able to take a site that's already on an enterprise level e-commerce platform, like a Demandware or a Hybris, and then shove it into AMP.
Right. Right, so it's kind of like a bit of a patchwork when it comes to e-commerce and some other things. So you're kind of, I think that, and we were talking about this earlier, essentially what you're doing is you're applying different components of AMP to different and specific use cases on an individual site. So not all the sites, not all the pages are going to be AMP. So as a result, you can, for example, you might put it in a blog post. What's that? Right, or an FAQ, or something that generally speaking is going to be a little bit more static. It's going to be able to load more quickly. It's going to ideally rank more highly and allow you to kind of attract more people into your site. And as a result, they might be then led to more traditional pages that might be, that might load a little bit more slowly. But the point being is like you're bringing people in. It's kind of like attracting, you're attracting traffic to come to your traditional site.
I have a question that's off subject that's really bad. SEO. Is it that bad?
Hey, why not?
Okay.
Is it related to AMP?
No.
All right.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay. Just before I forget, if your website is either custom made or using a premium fee, does that affect SEO?
Well, I mean, there's an awful lot to go in there. That's pretty broad. So, not necessarily. Well, I mean, it depends. So, like that there are a million questions that kind of can be lumped into that one specific one, if you kind of follow what I'm saying. So the problem is, yeah, you could buy a custom theme if you're talking about WordPress or something like that.
Yeah.
But if they don't know what the hell they're doing, it could suck, or it could be or alternatively, it could be fantastic. So I don't know if that really answers your question, because generally, what I would say as a rule of thumb, if you buy a custom theme for WordPress, there will be greater attention paid in general to the design and the development, as opposed to something that's free, because oftentimes the thing most
No, what I mean is either buying a premium theme for $60 or having someone custom make a theme from scratch for you on WordPress.
the problem being is like you don't know if either one of those developers knows what the hell they're doing. So,
You get support.
pardon me?
You get support.
Right, if you could get support, and once again, if you kind of apply a few rules of thumb, if you can actually test the theme, let's say if you're going to buy something off of like, the Envato marketplace or something like that, and you can actually test it to see how quickly it's loading and basically run a few, simple tests, that'll give you a pretty good indication of how well it's going to do. The problem with a custom theme, though, is that once it's done, they hand it to you, and depending on the arrangement, they might walk away and it could suck, and you might not have any recourse. So, anyhow, did anybody else have anything to add with regards to that question? Because
Later.
all right then.
Put that at the end.
You have an AMP question though. That's
Sure.
actually related to analytics.
Oh,
Is
boy.
it still, so like I remember 2 years ago, I haven't really looked at the analytics on a while because I don't deal with that much in. The problem was that, they were cached pages on a Google domain, right? It was like google.com/ whatever the site was. And when someone landed on one of those pages from search results and then clicked over to, say, a non-AMP page, right, because it's difficult to code everything in AMP, it was a referral session coming in because it was like basically cross-domain. Do you know if that's something fixed yet with Tag Manager? Or?
Yeah, they fixed it.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see kind of two buckets. You're still going to see referral traffic from the AMP CDN,
Right.
but you will see session data like filtered to organic in GA for your AMP URLs. You can see that, provided you built it on a subfolder.
Right. Cool. Great. So, structured data, kind of the source of a lot of different things that are going on today. Once again, Google suggests, hey, we really think that you ought to be using structured data. And generally speaking, I think slowly but surely, the vast majority of most sites actually do. But the use of it, I think, is pretty interesting, especially with the with the voice search and the use of Google Home and different assistants. I think that it's only going to increase, because I think that generally speaking, structured data is going to help pages and sites rank more highly. So once again, what is structured data? In short, it's basically telling search engines, or giving search engines more information about the data on a page. So it kind of uses a vocabulary, and Google understands what components are made out in that vocabulary, and as a result, when you're using structured data and when the crawler comes and crawls your site, it's going to have a better understanding, generally speaking, of what happens beyond that page.
Yeah, the majority of the web's data is unstructured, so structured data gives us the ability through a language, a programming language that Google agrees that they'll read and crawl through schema.org that says, hey, these are the main elements of this page. This is what this thing is about. It's how we disambiguate the query. We tell a bat from a bat from a bat.
Right, exactly. So the point being, though, is that ultimately there's many different types of, I guess, information types. So you could be a person, you could be an organization, you could be talking about a product, you could be talking about the specifics of a recipe. Obviously, that's pretty familiar. And all of these are different examples of different the results of schema and the fact that Google actually serves it.
I was going to ask
Madam?
what's the difference between structured data and schema.
A schema is essentially kind of like, well, so you have schema.org, okay, which essentially is, I guess you call it a vocabulary.
Yeah.
Schema.org is vocabulary. It's basically a structure in which you use to identify things. A schema in general, a schema, not schema.org, is essentially, how do you describe it? Kind of like an organizational system.
Sure. So there are types of structured data. There's a structured data that's available through schema.org. Open Graph Protocol, which is Facebook's structured data, and Twitter cards, which is Twitter's kind of structured data. So there's all mechanisms by which different crawlers can parse information from your HTML, your JavaScript more effectively. And some crawlers read one particular version of structured data, and some crawlers read
Right, and for example, the Google crawler also kind of understands like Open Graph. So oftentimes you'll see the results of Open Graph tags being presented within Google search results because generally speaking it understands that, but it may not necessarily present or display the result of other types of structured data,
Okay.
if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So is schema a different type of structured data?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's like your granddaddy structured data, like the HATOM shit
Right.
that's still like in default WordPress installation, but that's like
Right. There's also, but once again, schema is basically a recognized standard or a recognized vocabulary. And so as a result, that's the one that when you normally hear people talking about schema, that's generally speaking the vocabulary to which they refer.
Because many crawlers can understand and read it.
Right. Well, there's an agreement between like Google and Bing and
Bing on
Bing
top
slash
very
Yahoo.
recently.
So-
Yeah. Yeah, Google had to decide on like a source of truth, and like schema was it. Just like for better or worse, they decided that the source of truth for information would be Wikipedia. Like, well, this is it.
Right. Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that is what it is. So.
Yeah.
Great. So one thing that Google had kind of talked about is like, hey, you should really be using progressive web apps. And I think that generally speaking, that's a little bit unrealistic, at least at this point. So essentially, a progressive web app is what? A presentation of in a web-like format that allows users to basically get information regardless of the network state. And it's much richer, tends to behave much more quickly. And as a result, though, you kind of need custom development work to kind of like get that done. And so generally, I would say that for most businesses, modest size, having a progressive web app is probably not a realistic thing to do at this point. What do you guys think? James? Don't give me that bullshit.
I would agree on that a little bit. Like, there's definitely a way to do it cheaper.
Well, yeah, but I mean, cheaper is also relative too, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're, a small,
Yeah, if you're like Joe's Pizza Shop, you should probably just do a WordPress site.
Right.
I mean, theoretically.
right? I mean, but the point being is that you want to deliver a rich, fast experience in a way that's really going to be compelling. And the problem being is that that's not often inexpensive. And so that's the reason why, from my perspective, I consider it, a little bit unrealistic. Does anybody else have anything to say about that, or?
BMW took their AMP pages and they fired them through a progressive web app shell. So it's right.
So if you're really going to complicate things, go the BMW way.
Sort of, yes. The progressive web app delivers is the mechanism by which the AMP pages deliver.
I mean, couldn't you achieve the same effect by just using a static site generator? I mean, that's like dirt cheap.
Sure, it's BMW. Can't be dirt cheap.
It's the ultimate website machine.
Right.
Well, I mean, but I think that to your point, if you're going to develop a site, you can do it in a way that will still be very fast. But for example, like a progressive web app, let's say that you lose your network connection, it's still going to function. So there is a difference there, but is it worth the price difference?
Yeah.
And that's
For
I
them,
think-
there's a case study on BMW1AMproject.org. You can see like the benefits of what they implemented.
Right, but once again, does everybody have that same
No.
budget? So not
Because
at
you're
all.
looking at redesigns. The majority of the stuff you're taking, like progressive web app, AMP, whatever, you're basically trying to sell your client, hey, you need a new website, effectively.
Exactly. That doesn't always go down well.
No,
So-
it's going to look exactly the same, and that's the point. But why don't I just keep the one I have now? Well, because it'll be faster. It's a hard,
Yeah, it's hard
esoteric
sell. It's
sell.
hard sell.
Some forms of PWA too.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure they've done gangbusters since they've been implementing everything, but I have to look at that.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me, but frankly, I don't know. So, another thing that Google had kind of suggested is the consolidation of both either sites and or content. So, has anybody here actually done something like that? So, and saw some good results. James.
Yeah, I helped you with it.
Yes. Okay, so you did this.
I
So,
helped you.
so to give everybody some background. So this is actually a network of sites for a current client of ours that basically they're in the automotive space, and so they had a number of different brands, and ultimately they have like one what I would call mothership, so to speak, a site that covers everything. And then what they chose to do is actually create 4 individual sites that actually implemented cross-domain canonicals to all of these other sites. And it was really kind of wonky. And, from our perspective, it's something certainly doable. It's a little bit complicated because there's 4 sites, but it's not huge and, totally unwieldy. And we're in the process of doing that right now. And so far we've seen some pretty decent results. But once again, anytime then when you're going to consolidate things, you are going to see a little bit of an analytics hiccup. But generally speaking, I think that it's pretty much going according to plan. I think that you also had that other auto parts site that basically that uses a variety of different, domains. I think that when I started using them, they had more or less talked about like these guys basically was like exact match domain, everything from turbochargers to you name it, and they were all created a long time ago. And over time, what they'd done is basically redirected everything to the one primary site. So that was, I think, before both of our times, but that's something that they had done as well.
Oh, with what, by auto parts?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of their sister sites. What they did was they had a lot of specialty domains. So they had a turbocharger site. They have one for like transmission parts outside of that. And they bought like exact match domains that's just like Transmissions Pro or something. And the hope was that having that domain would bring more people to specific queries. And that used to work admittedly better than it does now. But with this, they were copying the pages, so they were cannibalizing themselves. They were selling the same UPCs across. And what we noticed here was the one in the middle did really well, and the others outside didn't. They were paltry in comparison. It's because they're splitting all that equity across for these tactics that used to work really well.
Yeah, so hopefully we're kind of fixing some dated approaches, I guess is what you're saying. Does anybody else have any examples like content or sites combination?
Well, last show we merged 3 cooking sites and cooking school affiliate sites into one. Essentially, what he's just talking about.
What was the result?
Technically that was a nightmare, but in terms of tracking, it was positive. It pulled up the sites that were lagging and contributed positively overall.
So I mean, obviously, so it was realistic, and you were able to achieve it.
Yeah, that was what 6 years ago.
Did you redirects to do that, or what was the?
Yeah, by hand. It was fun.
Nice.
Redirect every year.
Nice.
I do want to add the caveat that that's not always the right decision to put them all in one. There are definite use cases that there are sufficient need for separate websites. I would say 9% of the sites I've seen, they usually should be consolidated, but there definitely are use cases that
Yeah. Right. So obviously you have to be careful about your decision to do that, but it's eminently doable, and hopefully, I mean, from what we've seen here is like it's not going to be something that can't be reasonably done with a modest amount of effort. So.
I mean, it depends. I think, to previous point, sometimes you kind of want to keep them separate, but the CMO at the top says, no, it's going to be one site, pal. Like I took the Palazzo.com, and brought it into the Venetian.com.
Mm-hmm.
We designed their hierarchy for that turned basically an entire brand into a subfolder off of that hotel.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's like knowledge graph considerations. These are pages that have their own Wikipedia listings.
Right.
The preservation of that brand while then convincing Google that, hey, no, it's the same thing. It's just over here in this tiny little folder. of this other site while also like chopping off,
Right.
75% of the original.
Right, exactly. So I mean, it's doable, and oftentimes, to your point, James, 90% of the time, it's probably a good decision, but it's not a blanket. Just go ahead and do that. Great. So that kind of summarized like what was contained within that specific post. And so obviously we had some things that were certainly doable, some other things that were less so. And so what we wanted to do is kind of talk a little bit about some of the things we feel are eminently doable and achievable in 2009. Some of which are not something dramatically different than what many of us are already familiar with. Others maybe a little bit less so. So HTTPS. Seems ridiculous that we're still talking about this, but at least at this point, as far as I know, only about 47% of all sites are on HTTPS as it stands now in January of 2019. So that seems retardedly low, given the benefits and the fact that it's what everybody should be doing. So,
How much is that?
what's that?
How much does it cost to get that certificate?
Free. It's
Yeah.
free. It's free.
Well, yeah.
Let'sencrypt.org.
Yeah, let'sencrypt.org. It basically will renew I think it's renew every 3 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
You're on
something.
WordPress, you said?
Yeah.
There's a program called Simple SSL. It'll simplify that process a lot.
And also it also depends on your host also.
Yeah.
I mean, your host can make it so much easier versus like, a $5 like Bluehost account might be a little bit more complicated. I don't know. But generally speaking, it's something that we really all should be doing. And especially once you start getting into businesses, hey man, it's 2019. Just pull the trigger. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a client that basically did that. I'm like, hey, yeah, we just went secure like last week. I'm like, oh, it would have been nice to know that ahead of time.
What?
And thankfully, like a few years ago, that would have really created a big ruckus, meaning that there could have really been a problem from a performance standpoint. Most recently, it seems as though Google's much more attuned to what's going on, and so as a result, it seems to be limiting the downside of that that migration. So clearly, that's something that should be done in 2019, if not like yesterday. So CDNs, page speed. Pretty much self-explanatory. I think we've talked to, most recently I think we've spoken with a number of different clients and we've made the recommendation to implement a CDN. It's so inexpensive, whether you're dealing with a WordPress site or it can be a little bit more costly for like a larger e-commerce site. John, are you guys still like, implementing CDNs or?
Yeah, I mean, right now there's a lot of clients that are making the move to Amazon. And then others that are restricted by their e-commerce platform. Like if you're in Demandware, you have to use Cloudflare. They're sold out to Cloudflare. It's not bad. It's just if you didn't want to use that, if you wanted to use Akamai, you prefer doing that, and you kind of shoot them all up.
But are you guys still like, actually having clients, finally still moving to CDNs, or does it
Not
just?
moving to them, no.
So most of them already have.
Right. The largest issue I find is Google not actually being able to tell the difference between downstream caching and server-side caching, where they can see it at the server level, sort of, but they don't actually, it doesn't matriculate down to the browser. So you go into PageSpeed Insights, and it's just like, your score's 30. Like, well, we have caching. So
Right.
convincing Google that the CDNs actually
Yeah, I mean, we still have clients that, ultimately haven't moved or haven't implemented a CDN. But the point being is like speed is super important.
Yeah.
You should, if you're in business, you really should be moving forward with that. Great. So, standard, tried but true content. I'll tell you what, Carolyn, you want to talk to us a little bit about content? So, for example, one of these examples is essentially a guide that we did for golfballs.com, and so we've been slowly but surely kind of developing that. Correct?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that we found an opportunity, and we're developing this golf tournament planning guide. I think that it's not sexy, but the point being is that so many people don't do content well at all, and they're not really finding or seeing opportunities to do that. I think we've done that with golfballs.com.
Yeah, if they're writing content and it's not optimized, then it's almost a waste of time. It's like total BS. But
Yeah, so content development is not super sexy by any stretch, but I mean, I think that generally speaking, to add that relevance and authority for a specific topic is very, very important. One of the past clients that we worked with was actually from Turn 5, which essentially is their Jeep site, the Extreme Terrain. They do content super well. And that's not because of us. They're awesome with content. So I mean, if you were to go to extremeterrain.com, you're going to be able to see all sorts of things from user stories to how-tos to you name it. I mean, they do it all really, really well. So the problem is, like, a vast majority of people really don't. And so I think that, from our perspective, that's something we feel is realistic. Anybody here have good examples? Chris, do you have any examples of clients that you work with that do content well, or do they do content, or?
I got a client who's in divorce support services. They are my lowest budget client. They're my oldest client. And pretty much all we do is content. Like, they're on a WordPress site, so we did technical audit when we started, fixed some stuff. We periodically fixed 404s and internal 301s and broken links and all that jazz. It's tough to get backlinks in the space because it's kind of spammy and everybody's trying to every divorce lawyer wants to do a guest post with the shittiest off-the-shelf content they've ever written. So we just do content. We do 1 to 3 posts a month. And we've got 440% growth year over year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
No link building.
So I mean, once again,
Content is
so ultimately, you know what? It's simple and it might not be sexy, but
You're writing for them?
No, so they have an in-house writer that's she is the founder of the company, is now basically her own divorce expert. So she writes for her own demographic, which is amazing, and then does really well on social. And I provide content outlines, kind of structure for paragraph headings, these are the things you need to say in this page. And that's kind of I give that to her, and she writes it.
So over 400% improvement, year over year, just based on content.
Huh?
So just you said 400% improvement, 400% improvement plus, just by basically, developing content and, optimizing it and making sure that it's the way that it needs to be.
So they had 3 pages of really optimized content that ranked well. They started 4,000 visits a month off of really a couple of posts that they wrote well, and then they had a lot of fluff, right? A lot of diary style content that was never going to rank. Hundreds of pages of that. So now everything we do is SEO focused, content outline, keyword optimized. I publish it. We get our CTAs, calls to actions in there, and then that's where we're seeing the growth now. But I also feel we had to do that for a while for Google to see that we were doing that.
Sure.
We're at a year and a half now. We probably started seeing 20% growth after 6 months. And then it went exponentially up from there. It's kind of ridiculous.
So it's not sexy, but I mean, you kind of slog it out, and it seems like you're able to achieve some traction. At least feel like you're going in the right direction, and it just spiked from there.
Yeah, and sticking with it, I think, is the key, and that's hard to explain to clients. It's we're going to put up a page. This page might not rank well for 3 months, just because that's kind of the way it works sometimes, right? You need to simultaneously keep doing this, and then a year from now, you're going to be losing your mind about how much traffic you're getting from the stuff that.
But it's hard to sell that when you're time zero, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
I feel like a lot of clients don't even realize how important it is. They're so hung up on technical aspects that they're back burner it. But it's this could really.
Well, the benefit and the drawback to technical stuff is hopefully you're able to fix it within reason pretty quickly, and that can affect an awful lot of pages. But then you run out of that, and you have to kind of start really working hard at it. So I think that overall it's something that we really, something that is totally realistic and everybody can do no matter what your size. So, smaller divorce lawyer or a larger e-commerce site, it can all be done and pretty effectively. Great. So Google Tag Manager. Who wants to talk about that, Jay? Do you recognize this?
Me or James?
Why not? So you want to give us a little.
You want me to take it, Jay? I don't want to take it.
Would you like to provide a little bit of guidance in terms of the use of GTM and just a general thumbnail of what you encountered and what you really
So we kind of touched on this, I guess, a little bit earlier, using GTM to make, page level code changes. Now, that's not necessarily the number one option, but this is a client that we had that had essentially moved to a new platform, Hybris, and they didn't really have a developer that could implement any of the things we needed to, whether that be title tags, canonicals, so on and so forth, meta, they have old meta keywords, everything's messed up. So me with the help of James and obviously the internet, went in and created canonical tags, no index, all the basic core stuff, updated titles, H1s, and did that all and rolled out through GTM through various tags. And we saw really good results in terms of indexation rate for titles and the canonicals, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that when you kind of encountered the site, it was pretty much on fire. It was like it was a bit of a dumpster fire, and there was no real way to use our preferred method of actually fixing it on the platform level. So, GTM or Google Tag Manager is a way that I think originally was constructed as a vehicle to be able to implement Google Analytics tags and also third-party marketing tags simply without access to a platform. And it's still the case, but I guess what you would call some alternative approaches to some SEO gives us the opportunity to at least make some changes. And generally speaking, while they're not guaranteed to always work, we look at it as kind of like the last gasp that we have when we don't really have the ability to work on that specific platform. And so I think that, if there's nothing else that we can do, that's something that we can certainly apply. And I think we use it not only for these guys, but a whole bunch of others, right, James?
Yeah, I use it for John Diva. They had a really specific issue that was very annoying. So it was a flat site in the sense that it was just pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no CMS. And they had two domains. They had a .com and .co.uk. So any canonical hard code would be irrelevant on the other domain. So I had to throw it through Tag Manager and then pretty much get the trigger to only fire, like if it's .com, fire this, .co.uk, fire this, because it was referring to the same source material.
Right.
So this is another example of like, we were dealt a bad hand, but then we used this to read that.
So it's not perfect, it's not guaranteed to work, but the point being it's eminently doable. And, obviously. So, we've had a lot of success with that, and once again, I think that that's something that most people would be able to use, even with a modest amount of JavaScript knowledge. I'm still working my way up to that, but certainly useful. Yeah.
I'll take my foot on that now.
Great. So John, query intent analysis.
Sure.
Drill us.
Real quick on that previous point, how do you guys handle the liability?
Oh, we tell them up front, like, listen, this is like almost, in the example, it was like, this is not what we want to do. Our recommendation is to the developer do some right away.
Right, but what I'm saying, like, if you do it, you're the one who did it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how that factors in just from how we engage with clients and how we engage from an SOW perspective. If the business isn't covered for the code changes you make, and that GTM doesn't fire for whatever reason, decides not to fire, the client decides, well, our metadata disappeared, we lost X dollars. Whoop.
Well, we also have them check all the code that we do.
Yeah,
So they can't push it live until they check it.
Yeah.
This GTM went down, I wouldn't really anticipate that thing in the future too, which is possible, but.
Right, but I mean everything. Typically when we encounter a site that is like a total dumpster fire, it's a total mess. So there's only one direction to go, and that's up.
Have they migrated to Hybris already when you guys showed up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't have a hybrid
And they-
developer, and they have a family of sites. Exactly.
Yes.
That's why this was a godsend to them.
Right.
So I totally understand where you're coming from, but they were already.
They really didn't even care. They're like,
Well,
whatever.
I was being totally literal. Like there was no direction except up. It was just everything was
We
just.
literally can't break this thing anymore.
No, not at all. So it was like they came to us and they were like, "We got a fucking problem,"
Yeah.
and we're like, "Well, this is the best thing that we can do based on everything that we have," and so it worked out really well.
Well, honestly, what's scares me the most about GTM is not even that. It's that I set up a trigger, and then I go through it, and then I didn't even think about a subfolder that exists that I know traffic, and then for whatever, say I have a regex rule to fire on certain landing betas, and then it fires on others that I just didn't think about. That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. But
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have to be perfect, James.
I know.
There's just always going to be that, though. There's always going to be like that one thing, that you didn't think of, and then it shows up in the data later.
Well, and then more times than not. You just, typically you're not going to have support on the client side to be able to give you that technical insight, and you can only work with what you have in front of you. You can spend hours.
You quickly fix it and say nothing. Nothing.
Cool. Query intent analysis.
Yeah, so I think this dovetails off of sort of content development and how we should probably think about keyword research in general and how we develop sort of going forward. Google develops or considers content. I'm sure everybody knows this in buckets, right? It's information queries, it's transactional queries, it's navigational queries. It could be that fourth category of that search result instant answer get type query. If you have a site, you have a client, you have a relationship who's trying to tell you that I want to rank for X keyword, and all that stuff is informational, and all the content that they have is e-commerce. Round hole square peg. Not going to happen. So we have to think about, I think, first, understanding the nature of the query and the contextualization of that query. Is there local present? Are there rich results on the page? Are there, people also ask, another form of rich result, who owns, the above the fold for that query, and what are they doing, and how is Google serving them? Because I think that's where we need to kind of move in. At least we should already be there now, but move into 2019 of looking at those things.
Sure. So I mean, effectively, it's kind of like another level or another couple levels beyond just your basic keyword research to then look at, well, so once again, what's the intent behind it? What's the background?
Sure.
And how do I sift through all of the potential targeted terms to really get us to a point where I'm going to be able to develop content that's going to basically be able to attract or improve my rankings for the terms that I'm going.
Agreed.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I think that overall, super doable. It just requires a little bit more thought.
Is there a way to rank into the news section of Google?
Which one?
The news section of Google.
Well, I mean, you have to, in short, you have to basically be able to, they have a whole set of criteria that talks about, the volume of content that you put out, whether it's timely. So there's a whole set of criteria to be able to be eligible for Google News. I think that's what you're talking about, correct?
The news section.
Right, yeah, so, but yeah, there's a whole set of criteria that you can actually go to. I think you can actually go to Google to determine what are all the criteria that I have to satisfy to be able to show up in Google News. But I mean, you have to put out a shit ton of content on a regular basis. So it's not just, and it has to be newsworthy. It can't just be like, hey.
Kittens or cats? Which ones are cuter? Find out here. Like you can't. Yeah.
Right, I mean, and so Matt, I know that some time ago we had one client, that was basically in the adult beverage space.
Yeah.
And they were interested in ranking in Google News. I don't think they ever, did they?
No, they do. They are approved for Google News. There are a very specific set of criteria that you can't post evergreen content in Google News. So it's essentially, you almost have to be a news station. So it has to be stuff that has a shelf life. Essentially, is what we refer to it as. So pieces that will not be relevant after almost 30 days, and so they're removed from the Google News Index. So you have to constantly update it almost every single day in order to rank.
So you're kind of like on a hamster wheel.
Right. So like say if you're for this specific site, a important person in that industry were passed away or purchased a new company, that's something that you could rank for in Google News if you published a piece of content on that in a timely manner.
Right. So it's not just like writing content and being eligible for Google News. It's like it has to have that shelf life. It has to basically, by its nature, that content has to expire. So not something that most small businesses or businesses that don't have a big capacity to create content would typically want to consider. So.
See, I'm starting a new site. What should I say? I have a new site.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, then there you go. So exactly. Cool. Great. So prepare for Google's on SERP experience. So needless to say, there's a lot going into the different changes that happen to be going on with Google. I mean, in general, I think that what you'll find is that to be able to stay on top of all of the changes is pretty necessary for you to be able to do your very best from an optimization standpoint. So generally speaking, the super scary part is that it's constantly changing. So, for example, James, some of the changes that you've seen, generally speaking, in the not too distant past, in terms of like what we need to stay on top of as we're trying to rank for specific pages. Anything from your perspective that come to mind?
You can get more specific.
Well, yeah. So, like, what are some of the changes? What are some of the parts of the scary part that, in short, like, has to kind of keep us all as SEOs on our toes?
I mean, just the fact that it's ever changing.
Constant change, John.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a bathroom break. So what this is part of, and the mic under there is Mike Blumenthal.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Local guy.
Yeah, local. What this is from SparkToro is Rand's new thing he's doing. What he's talking about is the impact of on-SERP experiences for Google and them serving you content that is solely within Google search results, and then the experience that you get is without ever needing to click on a website, and that trend is growing. Markedly so for organic when it comes to mobile click-through rate.
This is what our girl was talking about the other day at the Traffic Think Tank event. The
really?
hosted inclusions. I think it's what she referenced it. The girl from Mobile Moxie. No.
Oh.
So in other words, the point being is that effectively, so much of this different content is being hosted by Google, whether that be through AMP or through any other number of means. And so that's the challenge.
Yeah, the way we're starting to turn here, we've let them crawl our websites, we've let them index our content. Now they've said thank you. Now we're going to take that content and put it into our own.
Well, now that, yeah, I mean, I think that the most difficult part is how do we make sure that the content and the content that we're creating is able to get into that ecosphere, so to speak, and so then to be able to serve it. So in the end, it's not the end of the world if they don't necessarily drop on our pages out of the gate, but how do we make sure that we still have as much visibility as possible?
Because the conversation is going to have to shift from, well, my sessions are down, to, well, you're in this.
But your impressions are up.
Well, but then what measures impressions? Search console data?
Yeah.
That's not the hill I want to die on as, as a client-facing person. Like, I want a much more accurate data set. I don't want to have to think of my top of funnel, my discovery-oriented channel as like display advertising, which is like then I'm getting into view-through conversions and just kind of through nonsense. The harder it is to connect to revenue, I think the harder it's going to be. And it's already difficult now, but the harder it gets,
Yeah, so I mean, I think that from a grand standpoint, we definitely have to start being a little bit more aware of the different ways in which things are changing.
Yeah, I mean, this is here now. Google Pugs on your phone, and you get a full.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
This is my first year SEO. I found PageSpeed Insights pet peeve slide, where somebody, you can tell if you're ever in an interview or if somebody's presenting their skills to you and they say eliminate render blocking JavaScript above the fold. What? All JavaScript blocks render. Which JavaScript are you talking about? Well, I think we need to get more specific about what matters for page speed on mobile devices, particularly when it comes to DOM content. Google cares about the DOM content load. How fast is the site above the fold visually complete for the searcher?
Well, it's difficult because let's say, for example, literally I was doing some research today and on this very topic and some of the elements. So if you're going to go through, and I don't know if everybody here actually is familiar with Google Lighthouse, which essentially is a synthetic speed tool that helps us understand how pages are loading and what's delaying the load and things like that. It's great. It's a really cool tool. But I've considered myself a reasonably knowledgeable. I don't have the technical wherewithal of some others. But to be able to get into the specifics, kind of like what you're talking about, is not an easy thing to do. It starts getting into start getting pretty esoteric very quickly. And so I do think that having developing a broader knowledge of what exactly goes into some of the different things that they call out in let's say the page speed tests is helpful. And how do you change that is really good. To get it to the nth degree and say, well, what exactly do I need to do to fix my pages? That's pretty tough. At least it's tough for me. It might be easier for James. It might be easier for you.
Yeah, it's extremely tough across the board. Every site's different. On the platform, the back end, what they have, if they have multiple CMSs on it, there's so much nuance that goes with it that a lot of times you just have to kind of pick your poison.
Yeah. Right. But I think that overall, your point is well made, and that is to better understand what exactly is delaying page speed and how within reason we can all address it makes an awful lot of sense. And it's hopefully, slowly but surely we'll all get a little bit wiser for it. So.
Sure, and that bottom slide is from Lighthouse, incidentally. And I think the benefit that it gives you is, it seems very technical and very scary, but at least on the right side here, I have what's on the table in terms of seconds. And that's a language even your point of contact can understand, 16 seconds. I can give you in theory, all things being equal, probably not true. I could give you 16 seconds of your website.
Hey, it's red and it says 16 seconds, so that means it's got to be bad. That's a long time.
That's a long time. Maybe we'll think about how long it takes to parse JavaScript on site then, huh? Maybe we'll take a look at that. And if that's the bridge that allows you to get a web developer on the phone with you for that call, you can at least start the conversation that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And with that, Does anybody have any questions? Because in summary, I think there's a lot of things that we can all do to make sure that as we go into 2019 are certainly realistic and doable. I mean, we've already talked about content development. We already talked about installation of CDN and a variety of other things. But there are also some other things that are, let's just say, a little bit more technically chewy or expensive that wouldn't really be realistic for most sites. Anybody else have anything to say or questions or anything with regards to the presentation?
Have you gone over Yoast yet?
Pardon me?
Yoast?
No, we haven't talked about Yoast. I mean, we can as it relates to all that good stuff. So I mean, we're going to hang out and we'll Yoast it up. Anybody else have any questions? All right, with that, thank you everybody. Thanks for coming out, and once again, great. Thank you.